At 9 p.m. on Friday night, Catherine Miller sank deep into her living room sofa, checking her weekend schedule on her smartphone. Cold autumn rain pelted the windows of her quiet apartment near Memorial Drive in suburban Houston, Texas. Thunder rumbled in the distance, making her shiver slightly. The voice of a local news anchor drifted from the television. "Food distribution volunteer work at church tomorrow, 9 a.m., she murmured. Catherine sighed softly while taking notes. At 34, working as a coordinator at a health insurance company, this was the start of her usual quiet weekend. The Sunday volunteer work at church had become an essential part of her life. Her eyes fell on a photograph hanging on the wall. It was the last picture taken with her ex-husband Mike before their divorce 2 years ago, captured in front of the fertility clinic at Texas Medical Center. Both wore hopeful smiles that now seemed somewhat ironic. 5 years of marriage. 3 years of fertility treatments. $120,000 in medical expenses. Countless hospital visits. Physical changes from hormone injections. A cycle of hope and disappointment. And finally, giving up everything and divorcing. Her life had been like a roller coaster of ups and downs. It was Catherine herself who decided on divorce, refusing Mike's suggestion to try one more time. Both her body and mind had reached their limits. She couldn't bear the monthly failures anymore. But perhaps, more truthfully, she couldn't bear seeing the disappointment in Mike's eyes. Now that everything was over, she had grown accustomed to living alone in this apartment. A modest cowboy hat adorned the wall, while a Bible and hymnal rested on the table. Next to the TV sat a Whataburger logo mug, Texas's pride. It was a simple room, but it had that warm Texan charm. Her job at the health insurance company was where her experience truly mattered. Especially in insurance consultations regarding fertility treatments, she could understand patients' anxieties and struggles better than anyone. When she said, "I understand," those words carried real weight. Though outgoing and sociable, trusted by her colleagues, she still carried wounds that she showed to no one. "Maybe we don't deserve to have children." When she had uttered those words during treatment, her best friend Rachel strongly disagreed. "That's not true. We'll definitely become mothers." They supported each other as kindred spirits. Now, that promise with Rachel had become a distant memory. After the divorce, she and Rachel grew apart. She didn't know why, or rather, tried not to think about it. Sometimes she would spot Rachel at church from afar, but they would just avert their eyes like strangers. Losing a best friend brought a different kind of pain than not being able to have children. The rain grew heavier, making the TV harder to hear. Catherine raised the volume with the remote. The meteorologist was reporting that the rain would continue through tomorrow. While checking her weekend schedule, she was taking notes for the church Christmas event meeting. Suddenly, her smartphone rang loudly. The screen displayed Mike. Confused by this late-night call from her ex-husband whom she hadn't contacted in 2 years, Catherine hesitantly answered. "Katie." A distraught voice echoed. "The funeral for our son is starting. What are you doing?" "What?" Catherine exclaimed in confusion. "We don't have a son." "What are you talking about? This is no joke." Mike's voice rose angrily. "Hurry up. It's at St. Mary's Funeral Home, near Memorial Oak Cemetery. The call cut off. Left behind, Catherine held her head in her hands, bewildered by the incomprehensible situation. Her ex-husband's distressed state worried her. Mike wasn't the type to get emotional. Something serious must be happening. Outside, the rain grew stronger. The streetlights reflected off the raindrops, creating an ethereal glow. Catherine stood up and took her coat from the closet. She didn't know what truth awaited her, but she had no choice but to head to the funeral home in this rain. Gripping her car keys that lay beside the Bible, she turned toward the door. An ominous feeling weighed heavily on her back. Catherine's Ford Explorer cruised along the wet roads. The wipers moved frantically, yet visibility remained poor. Houston's nighttime cityscape appeared hazy through the rain. Why am I? Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She had hesitated about going, but Mike's distressed voice wouldn't leave her mind. In their 5 years of marriage, she had never heard him so upset. He had always been calm and rational. From Memorial Drive to Westheimer Road. As her car stopped at a traffic light, vivid memories from 7 years ago came flooding back. In spring 2017, she met Rachel at the Houston Family Center, a fertility clinic near this intersection. Sitting next to each other in the waiting room, they hit it off immediately. Same age, similar circumstances, it felt like a fateful encounter. This is my third IVF attempt too, Rachel had said with a gentle smile. She was holding a thick novel, explaining that she always carried a book to pass the time while waiting. Oh, is that Stephanie Meyer's new book? I'm reading it too. That was the beginning. As they continued their weekly hospital visits, they became best friends. The struggles of treatment, relationships with their husbands, anxieties about the future, they shared everything. Hey, let's make a promise, Rachel had said one day, her expression serious. They were at their usual post-treatment spot in Starbucks, drinking their caffeine-free coffee. We'll definitely become mothers. It's bound to happen. After all, we're trying so hard. Catherine had nodded silently. Tears glistened in Rachel's eyes. They clasped hands tightly. It was a moment like taking a vow to share their hope. The sound of sudden braking brought her back to reality. The car in front had abruptly slowed down. That was close. Catherine let out a deep sigh. The rain was getting even heavier. Remembering was painful. Especially their last conversation. It was 2 years ago, right after Catherine had decided on divorce. She told Rachel at their usual Starbucks. I've decided to divorce Mike. Rachel's expression froze for a moment. But there's still hope. I've reached my limit, Catherine had said, fighting back tears. I can't do this anymore. Rachel's reaction then was strange. Confusion and what seemed like guilt briefly crossed her eyes. I see, yes, Rachel had gripped her coffee cup tightly. Everyone has their limits. After that, Rachel suddenly announced she was quitting treatment. Catherine never learned why. Then contact ceased. Even when they saw each other at church, they acted like strangers. Sometimes she heard rumors around town that Rachel had a child. But she never tried to verify them. To protect her heart, she continued pretending not to know. The GPS announced 5 minutes to destination. St. Mary's Funeral Home was near Memorial Oaks Cemetery. It was one of Houston's historic funeral homes. The white building illuminated by lights came into view through the rain. There were already about 10 cars in the parking lot. She could see figures with black umbrellas entering the building. Before turning off the engine, Catherine took a deep breath. Her face in the rearview mirror looked strangely pale. Why am I here? The question crossed her mind again, but it was too late to turn back now. She took out a small cross pendant from her wallet and pressed it to her chest. It was a keepsake from her mother. Whenever she felt anxious, she would pray to this cross. Lord, please guide me. After a quiet prayer, Catherine stepped out of the car. Cold rain struck her cheeks. Opening her umbrella, she headed toward the funeral home bathed in pale light. What awaited beyond those doors? As she approached the entrance, she could hear a hymn. The quiet melody of Amazing Grace. She placed her hand on the heavy wooden doors. Beyond them, surely waited a truth she had never imagined. Slowly, she opened the door. The moment Catherine opened the doors of St. Mary's Funeral Home, warm air enveloped her cheeks. A stark contrast to the cold rain outside, a distinctive warmth. The quiet melody of Amazing Grace drifted from the small chapel. Several figures stood in the lobby, people in black clothes exchanging hushed conversations. An elderly African-American woman embraced a young Hispanic man. The typical Texan diversity was present even here. Miss Catherine Miller. Suddenly, a voice called from behind. Turning around, she saw a man who appeared to be a funeral home staff member. Mr. Mike Miller is waiting, he said, pointing toward the chapel. Just then, someone burst out of the chapel. It was Rachel. Her makeup was smeared, eyes swollen. Upon seeing her, Catherine's body froze. Rachel. The word squeezed out of her throat. Their first meeting in 2 years, and in such a place. Rachel stared at Catherine for a moment, then quickly averted her eyes. Behind her, Mike appeared. Katie, you came. Mike's voice was calmer than on the phone, but his eyes were severely bloodshot. His arm was placed on Rachel's shoulder, supporting her. Catherine couldn't believe what she was seeing. What's going on? Before she could find the words, the chapel doors opened wide. Inside was a small white coffin. White flowers surrounded it, and on the altar was a photograph of a boy about 8 years old. A smiling boy. Something familiar about his features. It's Tom, Rachel said through tears. My son, our son. Something crashed loudly in Catherine's mind. Your son. The words made no sense. Mike and Rachel. A son. Fertility treatments. Promises. Betrayal. Everything swirled and mixed in her head. Just then, hurried footsteps echoed from within the chapel. A young nurse rushed in, out of breath. Mr. Miller. The nurse's voice cut through the silence. Tom's heart, his heart has started beating again. Time seemed to stop. Rachel nearly collapsed, with Mike desperately supporting her. The chapel erupted in chaos. The pastor began reciting prayers. Someone was calling an ambulance. Emergency surgery is needed, the nurse continued. But we need massive blood transfusions. Blood type compatibility tests are necessary. Amidst the confusion, Catherine was finally beginning to grasp the situation. What was happening before her eyes was gradually becoming real. Her former husband and best friend. And their son. A truth she had never imagined was violently thrust before her. Cold air conditioning blew down from the chapel ceiling. The hymn had stopped, replaced by the hurried voices of people. An ambulance siren approached from the distance. Outside, the rain continued falling. "Catherine!" Mike called out. His voice carried an indescribable weight. "There's so much we need to explain." Catherine nodded silently. Her throat was dry. Her heart pounding. How would the truth about to be revealed change her life? The paramedics arrived, bringing more chaos to the chapel. Medical staff moved quickly, exchanging instructions. The boy in the small coffin, Tom, was still alive. A miracle was unfolding. "We'll transport him to Texas Children's Hospital," a paramedic announced. "Which family members will ride along?" Rachel and Mike stepped forward. Watching their backs, Catherine let out a deep sigh. Was this fate? Or just cruel coincidence? "Catherine," Rachel turned back, her voice trembling. "Please, come too." Outside, the ambulance sirens wailed, and the rain grew even stronger. The white flowers in the chapel swayed in the air conditioning breeze. The night had only just begun. Amid the bustling people, Catherine clutched the cross at her chest tightly. At the hospital they were heading to, all truths would be revealed. Whether this was a blessing in disguise or the beginning of a new tragedy, no one yet knew. The corridors of Texas Children's Hospital never quieted, even past midnight. Catherine sat on a hard bench outside the emergency operating room. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air. The faint hum of vending machines. The footsteps of night shift nurses. "I brought you some coffee." An elderly African-American nurse offered a paper cup with a kind smile. "You've been sitting here for quite a while." "Thank you." The clock showed 2 a.m. Tom's surgery had been going on for 4 hours. Rachel was in the prayer room with the pastor, and Mike was in another room consulting with doctors. Catherine could only continue waiting here. Her contemplative profile cast a shadow on the white wall. Why was she here? That answer remained elusive. Catherine. Turning around, she saw Mike standing there. Her former husband's face showed a weariness she had never seen before. "Let's talk. I owe you a complete explanation." In the hospital's small cafeteria, only the late-night lighting illuminated the two of them. Outside the window, the rain continued falling. "First, let me apologize," Mike's voice resonated low. "I'm truly sorry for hurting you." And then, all the truths began to unfold. The meeting at the fertility clinic. Catherine and Rachel's close friendship. And the secret relationship between Mike and Rachel. Everything had progressed in a direction Catherine had never imagined. "While you were going through fertility treatments," Mike's voice trembled. Rachel and I. Their confession cut like a knife through Catherine's heart. Rachel had never actually been receiving fertility treatments. It was all a lie. With help from a friend working at the clinic, she had only pretended to be a patient. Then she became pregnant through her affair with Mike. Tom was that child. But the blood type. Catherine remembered the earlier test results. Then Rachel appeared. Her face was wet with tears. Tom isn't Mike's child, her confession continued quietly. I also had a relationship with. The truth led into an even more complex maze. Rachel had also been involved with a local TV station cameraman. He was Tom's real father. On Mike's phone screen, Catherine and Rachel's names had been adjacent. He had misdialed in his panic. Everything tonight had started from that small mistake. We're terrible people, Mike whispered. Catherine silently gazed out the window. The rain was finally beginning to let up. 3 months later, on a Sunday, church bells announced the morning service. Catherine sat in her usual seat. 3rd row from the right, near the pulpit. Today's sermon theme was forgiveness. The pastor's words quietly sank into her heart. Tom had survived. The emergency surgery was successful, and he was now in rehabilitation. He had begun meeting his biological father, and a new family structure was gradually taking shape. Rachel and Mike had each started walking their own paths. Rachel had decided to begin a new life as a single mother. Mike was attending counseling, confronting his mistakes. Catherine herself had also undergone changes. While continuing her work as a medical insurance coordinator, she had begun pursuing certification as a fertility treatment counselor. She wanted to use her experience to support others. That desire had become her new goal. Morning sunlight streamed through the church windows. Light passing through the stained glass created rainbow patterns on the floor. Beloved, the pastor's voice echoed. Let us love one another, for love comes from God. Catherine quietly closed her eyes. The cross at her chest softly reflected the light. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone experiences betrayal. Everyone hurts others. But life continues beyond that. Leaving the church, a gentle spring breeze caressed her cheeks. The sky was blue, announcing the arrival of a new season. Walking along Memorial Drive's tree-lined street, Catherine smiled slightly. The sadness and anger had all made her stronger. And now, she was greeting a new morning. Gripping her car keys, Catherine looked up at the sky. A small rainbow arched across the rain-cleared blue sky. It looked like a symbol of new hope. Tomorrow, her fertility counseling course would begin. Textbooks and notebooks were already prepared in her bag. She was ready to take a new step forward. Well, let's go. Murmuring to herself, Catherine opened the car door. On Texas soil, a new story was about to begin.